But I had also another idea, because you were saying that, well, when we were talking about technical approach and preparing and changing the sound, are there any violinists, like in older days, or that you know that were inventing certain techniques that are named after them, or that were creating a certain sound while they found a composition and they tried to find out how they could play a certain like written part, and they invented a certain movement or something like that? I was wondering if that was happening, or if it's...
Well, people wrote their own music that survived.
Yes.
So someone like Henri Virton, a French violinist. Sorry, I say that again. I don't. Oh my God, I'm so tired. So yeah, Henri Virton,
Right.
who has a French name.
Yeah.
He was he was a performer, but he also wrote his own music. Paganini was a performer who he wrote his own music, but he didn't necessarily want other people to play it.
Okay.
He was very secretive about his own music,
Right.
but people copied it anyway and wrote it down when he was practicing, or his students wrote down what they remembered, and then his music survived. Or you have Eugène Zaï, the Belgian violinist who taught my teacher. He wrote a set of solo sonatas, and I think a lot of the composers we think of today as composers were also performers on their instrument.
Right.
So in that sense, they left a legacy. But I think it would be hard to say, well, this is the, why don't you do that Paganini trick? Like, do the Paganini. I don't know if that would necessarily exist, but I'm sure that they invented things. I mean, it's clear when you look at their music and you look at where it came from,
Right.
that they were putting things in there that weren't in music before.
Okay.
Are there things like that with pianos?
Piano? Absolutely. I mean, maybe, of course, there are also stuff that is very unusual to play, because some of the composers have enormous hands. I mean, you know, which is very hard to actually stretch your fingers to this level. And I don't know if that is on the violin as well, that maybe people that invented or wrote pieces had much bigger hands, and it's very hard to play 2 notes or 3 notes at the same time. So, but I like the idea of the process, how, you know, you want to do something, but you don't know how, and nobody has written it, and you really try to find a way of doing it, even though your physical circumstances are not not ideal, and everyone says to you, no, it's not working. And that's also why.
Do you find that a lot yourself?
Well, I find in my world, you have a lot of weird people that are, you know, maybe they just want to invent something, or they just try to find, maybe they're sound searchers or something like that. So, which I really like, but that has mostly nothing to do with like physical ability. It's more, maybe they work with synthesizers, or they have a intense energy to find a certain thing.
I mean, I've thought of putting things in a piano, but more from the perspective of, this would be a really good place to store something valuable.
Yeah, or like do it in a
bar. I mean, it's just awful. It's awful to think of a piano as a storage cabinet, but I have this violin. You know, I'm always fascinated by the fact that a violin could fit inside a piano.
Yeah.
And have lots of room to run around. It's just kind of, it's amazing. Yet these instruments work together, and somehow they're seen as equal. But you have to struggle with that when you're playing piano and violin together, because the violin is smaller. How are you going to, you know, show it? And with the preparations, it's the same thing. You only have 4 strings to prepare, as opposed to all the ones that you do. So but you came at it from a different angle.
Yes, definitely. Well, it's very difficult to say that while already like nearly 60 or 70 years people were doing it, but it's very interesting for me to look back and see how detached actually music scenes are, and that people can work for ages and maybe for 100 years, and a certain part of the humanity or of people really don't know about this composer or this technique. And so when I started, I had no idea of John Cage, and I had no idea that there are other people working as prepared pianists. And because I was coming from the electronic music, and I tried to like play electronic music with an acoustic instrument. That's why I was using these whatever elements or things inside of the piano. And then after that, I think on the second album that I did, I asked a friend of mine to do a write-up about the history of prepared piano, because I thought there might be people as well that were doing piano music with preparations, and during that time people mentioned, it sounds like this and this, or it sounds like Henry Cowell, and I had no idea who is he. And then he was writing that he was the teacher of John Cage, and John Cage was actually mentioned there, but also other weird people that were like coming from all sorts of angles, and they actually did it maybe by themselves. Funny enough, it's a lot of times a practical reason, because I think John Cage started preparing the piano, which I read in some article, by he had he should do a composition for a theater piece, and it was written for drums and piano, but the stage was too small, so he could only fit a piano in there, and the drums had to go. But then he decided he will write the drums for the piano, and he was using things inside of the strings to create a drum sound. And I think that's very funny, because it shows actually the nature of how things develop. It's sometimes not really the approach of changing something, it's just the practical reason, because it doesn't fit.
Right.